Good morning. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming.
Did I? I think I'm on the way there, but I don't.
The United States has produced two extraordinary, influential major architects, both named Frank. This is not Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the other one.
I didn't meet Frank Lloyd Wright. I wanted to, but
I'm sure you all know that Frank won the Pritzker Prize for Architecture, which is the Academy Award of the discipline.
long time ago.
That was in 1989.
Before you were born. There's Edie Broad.
And just to set, I want to read to you the citation that was written at that time. It's very short. It's only 7 sentences. But I need to set the stage a little bit before I read it. In 1989, and I should also preface this by saying I'm not an architecture critic nor an architecture historian, so I may get some things.
Oh, well, I'm going to leave.
For about 10 years before the Pritzker Prize was announced, the architecture profession, I think you could say, was in some aesthetic turmoil. There was an exhibition that had been mounted at the Museum of Modern Art in 1979 by Arthur Drexler called Transformations in Modern Architecture. It was controversial partly because Drexler, who'd been at MoMA for a very long time, he was the longest serving curator in the history of the museum. He basically did an exhibition which said, modernism in architecture is dead. It is over. Some people agreed, some people didn't agree. There was fistfights and things like that. And the profession changed, and a number of architects began developing what came to be called postmodernism, kind of trying to adapt neoclassical styles or neo-Gothic styles or whatever. And meanwhile, in Santa Monica, this guy had built a structure around his little 1920s bungalow on a side street in Santa Monica that was unlike anything that was being done. So let me read these 7 sentences to you. From the citation. In an artistic climate that too often looks backward rather than toward the future, where retrospectives are more prevalent than risk-taking, it is important to honor the architecture of Frank O. Gehry. Refreshingly original and totally American, proceeding as it does from his populist Southern California perspective, Gehry's work is a highly refined, sophisticated, and adventurous aesthetic that emphasizes the art of architecture. Now you know why an art critic is here. His sometimes controversial but always arresting body of work has been variously described as iconoclastic, rambunctious, and impermanent, but the jury, in making this award, commends this restless spirit that has made his buildings a unique expression of contemporary society and its ambivalent values. Always open to experimentation, he has as well a sureness and maturity that resists in the same way that Picasso did, being bound either by critical acceptance or success. His buildings are juxtaposed collages of spaces and materials that make users appreciative of both the theater and backstage, simultaneously revealed. Although the prize is for a lifetime of achievement, Frank was about 60 at the time. The jury hopes Mr. Gehry will view it as encouragement for continuing an extraordinary work in progress, as well as for his significant contributions thus far to the architecture of the 20th century.
Wow.
So I never read that, luckily.
That's why I read it, because I have two questions. One, did you believe it then, and do you believe it now?
No.
No. You didn't believe it?
It's not about that. It's for me, it wasn't. I was interested in what was going on in architecture. I was very interested in what Drexler was talking about, because we were coming out of wars and modernism and buildings by Breuer, and except for Frank Lloyd Wright, everything was kind of cold and you know, Mies van der Rohe, very precise, and the culture wasn't that. It was heading for all kinds of chaos. So I looked at it. I remember the show at MoMA, the Drexler show, and it was very powerful. If anybody had seen it, it was really seductive. It was, you could just go there and lap it up and just do that for the rest of your life. And some of the architects started going down that rabbit hole. I was at a conference with a lot of them, a lot of my friends, like Michael Graves and Moore and Venturi and Philip. And it was at that group, that time, that Philip put the little twirly thing on top of the AT&T. It was as a result of that show. And some of the other architects were doing what we ended up calling postmodernism, because the show, Drexler's show of postmodernism, was very seductive. I can tell you, you could just go in those buildings and love it.
What was seductive about it?
They were just warm and friendly and embracing, and you know, it didn't, but it had nothing to do with the time we were living in. And so
Details.
So it worked for some people, but you know, generally you couldn't go there because it was expensive to do it. I was at a conference with all of those guys, and I remember I had my 15 minutes of, I said, why do we have to go backwards? Why can't we, the world is moving, there's airplanes and all kinds of movement, cars, boats, rockets, whatever. Can't we find a way to express our time? There must be something that's inspirational that we can deal with. And I ended it, I remember ending it by saying, well, if you can't, maybe go back 300 million years before man to fish. Because I had been studying Japanese woodcuts by Hiroshiga. When you started in architecture, when I did, in the 50s, it was right after the war, so the GIs came back from Japan with a pile of information on how to build small houses, beautiful houses with tatami mats and little wood structures. So my teachers at USC were doing that, and it was pretty seductive. So I got all involved with Japan, and so Hiroshiga's woodcuts on fish were particularly interesting to me for some reason. And I said, they're very architecturally, they express movement, 300 million years before man. Why don't you look at that for inspiration? Well, they didn't, but I did. And I got fishy, and that's how I got fishy. And I apologize for getting fishy, but that was a law.
You probably have seen pictures of or been to Frank's house in Santa Monica, which is a sort of circa 1920, I think it's Dutch colonial pink stucco house.
It was on Ocean Avenue, and they moved it in 1900 to that side.
Oh.
And it was a duplex. And there was land beside it. So I just built a kitchen and dining room to it. And so when you sat at the dining room table, or when you were in the kitchen, you were looking at the house, complete facade. Right. When you were in the living room, you were looking at it. And it was, you know, it was a discussion between the past. The neighbors hated me. They tried to get, they went to the city, tried to get it knocked down. Neighbor from across the road was standing there with me one day, and he said, "How could you do this to this neighborhood?" And I said, "Where do you live?" And he pointed across the road, and I said, "You have a chain link fence around your garden, don't you?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You have an old trailer in the backyard, don't you?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You have a car jacked up on blocks in your front yard, don't you?" I said, "What's the matter with that? Give me a break." Anyway, it kind of worked, and I keep that house for some reason.
The kitchen that you were mentioning has asphalt floor, like the driveway to the garage. And I remember the first time I went there, this must have been in the 80s sometime when we met. And I went there and I was sitting at that kitchen table. There's a big skylight up above and a glass wall. And it dawned on me what you just said. I was looking at the picture window on the pink stucco, looking into the living room of the house. And I thought, the great modern California cliche of architecture is indoor-outdoor living. And there I was, outdoors, indoors, looking at the indoors while I was outdoors at the same time. But it looked nothing like Richard Neutra or Albert Frey, or it was not glass walls, you know, with sliding doors and so on.
Well, I wasn't trying, actually. I didn't.
That just happened?
No,
you didn't have that in mind.
My personality wasn't trying to do that. I was just making a house for the family. I can't help it.
Is there anything Japanese about that aesthetic?
I don't know, probably.
The warmth, maybe?
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I did a few Japanese. My very first house out of SC looks like it was designed by a Japanese architect.
Uh-huh.
It was for Julius Schulman's brother-in-law. They never built it, but it's very Japanese. And then the Walt Disney, I actually played in the Gagaku Orchestra at UCLA. They had an ethnomusicology department. And so I joined that. That's the Imperial Court music.
Uh-huh.
There's very few pieces, and the musicians only work in the imperial household. And so when Disney Hall was finished, the Gaga crew came to Disney Hall. They'd never come, but I have pictures of them sitting on stage at Disney Hall, and you could see the Japanese influence in the Walt Disney Concert Hall.
Okay.
You can see it. It's pretty clear.
Okay, let's just speak.
Something comes from somewhere. Everything comes from.
Speaking of Disney Hall, let's talk. Disney Hall, the Guggenheim Bilbao, the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris are three pretty well-known buildings these days. One thing that interests me about them is that they all, in some way, riff on boats, on sailing. The Disney Hall is like this big three-masted schooner with giant sails, and Bilbao is a more industrial, because it's up against the river in an industrial town. And the Louis Vuitton glass building, those big glass sails are like a sailboat in an impressionist painting. What is this with boats? I know you were a sailor and you built your own boat.
I were a sailor. I am a sailor.
You are a sailor.
Well, kind of. I have a boat, and I designed a boat for somebody. Yeah.
The Foggy, right?
Foggy, yeah.
Yeah. So what's the attraction for boats as a aesthetic motif in designing?
I don't know. There's something. There's clarity of some kind. I don't know. I just love it. I love the feeling of nature and the blah blah blah. I can get romantic about it.
Well, they do have a sense of graceful movement to them, and
yeah.
I mean, one of the interesting things to me.
Well, it's again the fish.
Yeah, and the fish. Oh, so you fish from the boat? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't fish from the boat.
Okay.
But there's the movement expressing. That's kind of interesting.
Because one typically thinks of architecture as a solid, an immovable
Static,
solid.
yeah.
But your buildings are engaging movement.
Yeah, I think in Bilbao it was really to engage the city, the river, the bridge, all the things that were there. And so it became a partner, a visual partner on the riverfront. It also has a variety of galleries, and I worked hard at that because that's a big deal to me. And it worked out. Disney Hall, I had worked with the LA Philharmonic for years. From my first meetings with Ernest Fleischman, when he came to LA, he asked me to work on the Hollywood Bowl. And he became my music teacher. And I spent a lot of time with him and with the music world. And so when the competition for Disney Hall came up, it was logical that I would enter. We never thought I would win, but I did.
Took a while.
I'm not a musician. I'm not a scholar on music. In fact, I just did the Rheingold with Gustavo, and I'm not a Wagner guy, so I was a little nervous about it. But I just did it as a friend. But I like to meddle with music projects.
You've done a lot of set designs for
Yeah.
musical productions. Do you approach the design of an opera set the same way you approach a building?
I approach everything the same way. You got to, whatever the issue is, you got to deliver. I feel very compelled to deliver on time, on budget, all that bullshit. And I do.
Yeah.
I've got a great track record. But
like where do you start? What's the, you know, okay,
well, you got a
okay, we're doing that, right?
I mean,
what do you
Disney
start
Hall, I met with the orchestra, I met with Ernest, I met with the community people. The program was pretty clear. We saw buildings that were already concert halls that were built that weren't very successful, like New York, like wherever, San Francisco. They were lacking. So this is around the country. And we really got into it with the musicians and with, I met with the composers, with the conductors, with the...
So it's a central thing.
Yeah, but you get into it. I mean, it's not peripheral. I'm in it.
Yeah. Okay, with something like Disney Hall or Bilbao, which are both, you know, sort of at the peak of architecture of our time, is there anything about either of those buildings that you would change? You'd like a do-over on?
I think Disney Hall could be simplified a little bit.
Really?
But it's not as complicated as it looks. It's just those wings are just the stairwells, and so I just made them curved. It's a box, and it's a box that has a lower part, a orchestra part, and an audience part, and balconies. So it's all pretty much prescribed. It's how you put it together and how it connects with the musicians. Do they feel part of it? The biggest problem in designing a concert hall is the relationship between the audience and the performer. And that's the same in theater. And if you're a theater person, you walk into a stage and you see the audience, you know pretty quickly whether you're there. Same in music. So we constantly look for ways to improve that. For instance, at Disney, the stage is up. We got VE'd out for an opera pit, orchestra pit, which was too bad. So this last Rheingold, I had to sort of fabricate an orchestra pit, which compromised some of the sound. And, so it's not easy to do opera in Disney Hall because it's not an opera house. But we did a little concert hall in Berlin for Daniel Barenboim for the Divan Orchestra, Israeli Palestinians. I got involved with it and did it as a gift to them because I was upset about what Israel was doing and stuff, and I wanted to, that's my politics, forgive me. And so it's an existing warehouse in Berlin. So I couldn't hang seats or balconies on the building because couldn't do it. So I ended up having a floating balcony. Well, nobody done that. It's bonkers, fantastic. And so we want to do one in Disney Hall, in BP Hall. We want to float a balcony and have the other thing we discovered by accident is that when the orchestra's playing members' feet are on the same floor as the audience, it's magic. It's crazy, but it works. Okay?
Huh.
So the Coburn School that we're doing across the road from Disney
Right.
has that. We'll have 1,000 seats, but the first row's feet are on the floor with the orchestra, and it has the floating balcony flying. So you learn, you keep building on it. But the main thing is the connectivity. And I, in all the years since Disney Hall's been open, people come up to me when I go at concerts and tell me how that works. And the orchestra tells me how that works, that they feel it. So that's it, that's the payoff.
So that kind of social connection is...
Yeah, and it works in theater too, you know. When Disney Hall was almost finished, the famous actress came, oh God, I forget her name. Anyway, she came and walked on the stage. The building wasn't finished, and she said, "Frank, this works." She walked off. So it does, you feel it, you know. If I was down there, we would be happier with each other right now.
Well, you want to? No. Okay.
No, but it's those subtleties, and it's stupid. And New York, they've just spent a lot of money redoing it. They didn't completely get it. They got part way, but they didn't get it. So Gustavo's going to have to work. But the culture is like theater. It's exciting. It's like artists. It's like art galleries. It's like all the stuff we look at, we go to, we love, we live on. I think that makes us happy.
Speaking of this kind of social connection, that sort of brings up the idea of city planning, and one of the things about Disney Hall is the context in which it exists. I mean, across the street from a fairly cumbersome Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, but the design of Disney Hall it just sort of like connects into this big building across the street. It like pulls it into part of the conversation and makes the life on the street better. And
well, I designed the building across the road, the hotel.
Yeah, well, that one, the different one, yeah. That's not.
No, but I was able to talk to each other in a funny way. I think that's the issue is connections, right?
Yeah.
Making connections with people, using the building to your advantage. It's not hard to do. You just have to think about it.
Yeah. You mentioned Ernest Fleischman and his, teaching you about music, and you, I'm sure, teaching him about other things. How important is the client in the development of a project?
Major.
Major. In what way?
You got to partner with them. There's several issues. One is the partnership to arrive at the conclusions so that it fits the way they want to use the building. So you got to make sure of that. And the other stupid thing is budget. And so, knock on wood, we come in on budget. Well, people don't know that about me, but we deliver. That's a major part of my deal. I won't do it unless I can do that.
There's a general conception that good architecture is expensive and trash architecture is cheap.
Bullshit. Good architecture means that the people, these people, us people, have to want to do it. Mm-hmm. And you have to have an open mind because things are changing. It's not the same today as it was 20 years ago. So if you want to make 20 years ago, you're going to spend a lot of money and waste time. You got to deal with the present. The present is exciting in music and theater and everything. Jazz, I'm very involved with Herbie Hancock.
Right.
I think
You must have some secret that we don't know about dealing with budgets, because you were telling me recently that that Bilbao, when she was at, oh my God, there's this impossible building, that it costs $300 a square foot to build that building, and if you do an inflation calculation to the present, that's about $800 a square foot for a fantastic museum that people want to go to. Okay, if you compare that to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, $1,200, $1,300. The Broad Museum, $1,200, $1,300. The Big McGill of the LA County Museum, which is currently under construction, that's $1,800 per square foot, which is sort of $800. You've got to know something that we don't know.
I do.
What?
I'm not going to tell you.
Okay. Come on. Come on.
No, it's obvious. You work with it's a construction world. We got involved with, I was doing a building in Spain. It's a big fish sculpture. If you've been to Barcelona, you've seen it next to the hotel. And the body of the fish came down, and then it has wings. So when the body comes down and has the wing, how to make that drawing so the guy knows how to build it. Okay, so the developer was a British guy, nice guy. He came to me, he said, I'd love your build. I want to build it, but I don't know how to do that. I had an Italian fabricator who I just started working with. I had just started investigating IBM and computer programming and stuff. And by accident, I fell into Dassault Systems, who build jet planes, Falcon jets in France, and their software is called CATIA. Very expensive, really expensive. One workstation was over $100, and it's hard for engineers to pay for all that. Massimo, the guy from Italy, says, how do I do this? I said, buy a workstation. So he buys one. He goes back to Italy, and he calls me a week later, and he says, perfecto. So we build, so it's just a matter of searching out the technology. There's stuff there. You can't levitate, but you have to work with geometry but there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of room if people ask questions and search for things. And I think I'm hoping younger people, I've been teaching at Yale for 20 years or so. And every project I get them involved with doing music, concert halls and stuff. And so there's been a lot of students that have worked with me now that at least have been trained in that. I don't know where it goes, I don't know.
There's a project you've been working on for at least a decade, I would imagine, that's in some respects quite different from what we've been talking about, but in some ways fits, and that is the LA River. The Los Angeles River, which runs from the valley down to roughly Long Beach and the ocean. It's 51 miles long. It's a concrete channel. The concrete was poured in the beginning, early in the 20th century, because it's essentially a flood channel. LA's flooding today.
It is a flood channel.
Yeah.
Not essentially,
yeah,
it is.
It is a flood channel, which is why the concrete is there, because things have grown up around it and you don't want to flood every. Tell us about that project. What are you concocting for the LA, 51 miles of LA River?
Two things. One is that there's groups of people and a very brilliant thinker, I forget his name, but had developed a program called Friends of the Los Angeles River. And they wanted to take the concrete out and make it a garden landscape. Very beautiful idea. Wow, 51 miles of garden thing. What's wrong with that? When you take it out, Godzilla comes only 2% of the time. That's the problem. Nobody believes it. But 2% of the time, Godzilla comes, and if there's the garden landscape, it displaces hundreds of homes.
Yeah.
So we can't put up with that. So what's the solution? One of the solutions, they've been building parks over freeways in parts of the country. And they're not cheap, but they're not out of line. You could build a park across the freeway. So we've been studying the area. All of this work, by the way, is philanthropy. I don't get paid for it. So I got into it. And the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rendon, is a very intelligent guy, and he wanted to do something. So I said, why don't we, the neighborhood south of LA, kids growing up there have a 10-year shorter lifespan. This is fact. You can read it, you can get it, but you can't hide it. They live 10 years shorter because they don't have open space. And they got the 710 freeway breathing, killing them. So that's a reality. Kids are dropping out of school there. It's a mess. Nice, oh man, great people, fantastic, you know. So we decided to make a cultural center along the river. It's been 10 years. They gave us a piece of land to do it, and then we found out that was a parking lot for county vehicles, and after we had the design, we couldn't use it anymore because the county vehicles had to go there. Bah.
Parking.
Anyway, so finally we got through all of that. We've designed a little street. It's going to have an art program from LACMA's involved. We've got Gustavo with Youth Orchestra LA, which is the outgrowth of where he came from Venezuela, which is what we did in Inglewood. We remodeled a bank building, knocked it out of the park for $1.98. I mean, it was really cheap.
Yeah.
And so we can build this street, and we can have dance and all that stuff. We finally got it cleared, and that program has been, Janice Hahn has got it approved, and we're clear. We've got most of the money. We only have to raise 50 million more. All of our time. I'm not fundraising. We're going to do it. It's no problem. I mean, to have your name put on a street, that cultural street, Mamma mia.
Yeah.
It's no problem. So I think that's a go, and it's going to, but the park part, we wanted to cover two pieces. It's at the confluence of the Rio Hondo and the LA River. And so we've shown how and there's a V. So there's a little area that's a parking lot that we can get and make a park. And we can cover part of the river on the LA River and part of the river on the Rio Hondo. And we can get a 40-acre park.
40 acres.
40 acres in an area where there's no, and we have renderings of it. It's beautiful. It's easy to do. The cost, and it's been approved by the Corps of Engineers. The cost is $800 million to save kids' lives. Now, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if the world is going to do it, but it's there. The cultural center definitely will be built, and will give some center and focus for that community. It's going to be interesting. They're going to have their own orchestra, their own concert hall, 500-seat concert hall. They'll be able to do concerts like we've been doing it in Inglewood at the bank building, which is not, I mean, the cost extra to turn a bank building into a concert hall was only $2 or $3 million. And bingo, it's now being used as a concert hall in that neighborhood. So it doesn't take much, and they don't have to be fancy. These are kids, they're willing to do it. And I've convinced Abu Dhabi, where I'm doing a opera house, to build a concert hall for kids, because the new leader in Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Khalid, is studying classical piano. So he's really into it. And Lang Lang is his teacher. So Lang Lang's, we're all connected now. But I think you know, I'm more excited about that stuff.
Yeah.
And luckily I don't.
Well, I mean, going back to your house in Santa Monica, it's chain link fence and plywood and corrugated metal. It's like it's not marble and crystal chandeliers and things like that. And it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful assembly. And we've got a couple minutes left, but when you first came to LA, we're living here in the 50s, early 60s. You got involved in the art world. How important was that for you to work with artists?
Well, I can't remember how it all started, but I was at SC in architecture. SC had an art department. I forget the names of the artists, but I used to go to all of their stuff. I got to know, who did I got to know?
There's a ceramist named Glenn Lukens who you were.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
fantastic.
That's it. That's
ceramic
it.
Artist.
So I was taking ceramics with Glenn Lukens. And Glenn realized that I wasn't going to be a ceramist. and he was really sweet. And we were kind of poor, so he put me into SC architecture class at night. And I was put in it with John Kelsey, Kelsey became Kelsey and Ladd that did the Pasadena Museum.
Right.
And we were in that class for a year, and we got skipped into second year architecture. That's how it happened. And Craig Kaufman had just come to SC in first year. Craig Kaufman, who ended up at UCLA. Yeah. And he was a knockout, you know, I mean,
great artist.
You couldn't.
Great artist.
Yeah, it was just exciting to be around him. And there was a lot of activity with the art world. And I met Billy L. and
so it was like a wide open.
But Ed Moses was the connection for me. So he was crazy, Ed.
Yeah, Ed was crazy.
But he did lead me to the promised land.
Yeah. we're out of time. I want to thank you again for coming, and I just want to say, before you applaud, at the end of this month, the non-Frank Lloyd Wright is turning 95, and happy birthday. Yeah.